Greetings, this is Dr. Tamilio. It is Monday, April 13th, 2020, the day after Easter. And this is a lecture on existentialism for my students in Introduction to Philosophy. Now, I want to begin by saying, doing a comprehensive examination of existentialism in one lecture is impossible to do. What I am going to do today is to touch upon some of its salient features, some of the main ideas that rise to the surface when people talk about this subject. I asked you to read the essay Existentialism is a Humanism by Jean-Paul Sartre. Here it is in book form, but I gave you a link in a separate email to find that essay online. And I'll also be referring to this play, No Exit, by Jean-Paul Sartre, and this novel, The Stranger, by Albert Camus, L'étranger in the original French, which translated into English means both the stranger and the outsider. So that sort of dual translation is quite fitting. Some of you may have had to read this book in high school. If you took an advanced French course, you may have had to read this in the original French. Anyway, back to the topic at hand, existentialism. I'm going to offer some thoughts and some notes on this. I will also post a discussion question on Canvas, and if you have any questions at all, please feel free to write to me. Tamilio, JTAMILIO @salemstate.edu. So, Jean-Paul Sartre, let's start with him because you read one of his essays. At least you should have read one of his essays. Sartre was born in 1905. He died in 1980. He is a French existentialist. He is not the founder of existentialism by any means, far from it, but he is the person often credited with putting a great deal of flesh, if you will, on this movement in the latter half of the 20th century. A lot of 20th century, the latter half of the 20th century, post-war, post-World War II, discussions about existentialism owe a great deal to Sartre. His theories still hold a predominant place today in this topic. Now, the Russian author Dostoevsky, who was born in 1821 and died in 1881, and the Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard, who was born in 1813, died in 1855, are often hailed as the fathers of existentialism. But as I said, Sartre is known for sort of the modern and postmodern expression of this theory. In his text, the famous essay, Existentialism is a Humanism, he defines this rather difficult field of study. So I'm going to sum up his argument, at least some of the main points that he raises here. Now, we have to begin with the realization that Sartre, like most, though certainly not all, existentialists, was an atheist. In fact, a lot of people, when they hear that term existentialism, they automatically assume that it's akin to atheism. And in many cases it is, but not all. There are clearly people who are theists who are existentialists. Sartre begins with this idea that there is no God. And if there is no God, then there is no transcendental divine meaning to human existence. And that's key. Right? We talked a little bit about this when we talked about predeterminism versus free will, right? But hold on to that idea for a moment. If there is no God, then there can be no transcendental divine meaning to human existence. Many people of faith think that there is a meaning to life, and that meaning is rooted in God and God's will for humankind. But if there is no God, there is no transcendental divine meaning. We exist, of course we exist, but there is no essence to our existence. Okay, Sartre talks about that. There is no God, there is no essence that precedes our existence. Because God does not exist, according to Sartre and other atheistic existentialists, then humankind is, as Sartre wrote, condemned to be free. Condemned to be free. Such a great juxtaposition of words. We don't think of the word condemned when we think of freedom, right? But we're condemned to be free. If God does not exist, then our essence, or the meaning of our lives, the purpose for our existence, does not precede or come before our existence, right? It's actually, according to Sartre, the other way around. Our existence, our being, our existence, precedes our essence. In other words, we are born. To use Sartre's term, we arrive on the scene. We exist. And the meaning of our lives unfolds from there. We are makers of meaning, the meaning of our individual lives. Meaning comes from our decisions, the decisions that we make, and subsequent decisions we make, and the actions we take, and the consequences of those actions. So meaning is very individualistic, because you might decide to do something quite different than me. You might follow a totally different path than I follow. And you're going to find a meaning for your life that is unique to you. But the problem with all of this, from an existential perspective, is that we do not know what the outcome of our actions are going to be. We must make decisions without knowing the consequences, for which we are still responsible, right? You have to make a decision. Think of it as if you're at a crossroad and you have to make a decision. You have to go one way or the other. And I mean this sort of metaphorically, right? You have to go one way or the other, and you don't know what the outcome of either path is going to be, but you have to live with it. You have to own it. You have to accept the consequences of your decision without knowing what the outcome is going to be. So existentialists often talk about how we face an absurd, silent universe. Ultimately, there is no fixed meaning to existence other than to exist itself. All right? The universe is silent because there is no God. There is this sort of notion within existentialism that, that man, to use the traditional, language, stands before a silent universe and screams out, cries out to the universe seeking an answer, and all he hears is the echo of his own voice. Now, people who subscribe to religion, people who are theists, people of faith, clearly struggle with this idea. They struggle with this notion. The meaning to their existence is often rooted in God and the tenets or the doctrines of their respective faith tradition. Okay? Now, granted, one can be religious and be an existentialist. Kierkegaard, for example. Kierkegaard's a perfect example of someone. He was a Christian, and he was an existentialist. Even still, existentialism struggles with this idea of a coherent, universal, or dogmatic meaning to life. So, again, think of it this way. You have these two terms, existence and essence. Think of existence as your own existence, right? Or human existence in general. You can think of it in a more sort of universal way. Think of the word essence as being meaning to your life. Does existence precede essence, or does essence precede existence? Again, Sartre would say existence precedes essence. You're born, then you decide what the meaning of your life is going to be through choices you make. And again, there's a sense of absurdity there because you have to make choices without any foreknowledge of anything. You don't have God's word to rely on. You have to make these decisions on your own, and you are responsible for the consequences of those decisions. So you exist, and then your essence comes about through really a lifetime of thinking and acting and making choices. The opposite of that would be that essence precedes existence, meaning the meaning of your life, the essence of who you are, comes before you exist. Now, there's biblical passages that seem to support that idea quite a bit. The prophet Jeremiah, before I knew you, before I knew you, I formed you in the womb. Right? You know that passage from Jeremiah. I knew you before you existed. I'm getting the exact quote wrong, and I don't have my Bible handy, but I knew you before you existed. I formed you in the womb. The idea being that that Jeremiah was endowed with a purpose before he even existed, when he was in his mother's womb. And many people believe that. Many people believe that God has a plan, and that God designed you, created you for a specific purpose. So Sartre would say that is the religious view, but it's erroneous because there is no God. Now, my critique of all this is that if there is no God, then you can say that Sartre's correct, that our existence precedes our essence, because there is no God to conceive it, to use, or to perceive it, to use Sartre's words. But you can be a person who believes in God, I think, but you don't believe that God determined your life before you were born, right? God gave you free will to decide for yourself what your life was going to be. This is very complicated, and it's not as simple as I'm making it sound in this part of our discussion. But just keep in mind this idea that you can believe in God. You can be a Christian, a Muslim, a Hindu, a Jew, whoever. You can be a person of faith and believe that God didn't preordain your life, but that the meaning of your life exists, but it's really in your hands, based on your decisions, your choices, what you decide to do with your life. Now, in this particular edition of Existentialism is a Humanism, which you don't have, you just read the article, the essay, Existentialism is a Humanism. There's another essay in here that Sartre wrote, which is a commentary on The Stranger. Again, this book by Albert Camus. Sartre believed, as does many, that this book is a excellent example. It's a work of fiction, but it's an excellent telling of what existentialism is all about. Now, Camus somewhat disagreed with that. He thought that this really highlighted absurdist philosophy. But it does cut to the heart of existentialism. If you read this book, or if you have read the book, it's the story about this man named Rousseau who commits a senseless murder. And that takes, the first part of the book kind of leads up to that, right? It talks about his life and how he is this sort of apathetic person who just finds joy in anything that gives him physical pleasure, whether it's food or smoking or sex or whatever. Sort of these animalistic physical pleasures bring him joy. And joy is probably not the right word to use there, but give him a sense of satisfaction, I guess is better to say. At the end of the first part of that novel, not to give it all away, but he ends up killing somebody. And in the second half of the novel, part 2 is his trial, and he ends up being sentenced to death. We don't see his execution in the story. The story ends with him sort of in his prison cell awaiting execution. But as you get into the mind of Meursault, and he's the narrator of this story, you get this sense that life has no meaning whatsoever. He chose his life to live his life one way. He could have just as easily chose to live it a different way. In the end, it doesn't really matter. And those ideas are very much foundational to existentialism. Nothing really matters. In fact, if you when I say that phrase, I think of that song by Queen, Bohemian Rhapsody. I really think that song is about the novel The Stranger, if you've read The Stranger and you listen to the lyrics or read the lyrics to Bohemian Rhapsody, it seems to align quite nicely with this novel, with that song. So really at the heart of it all is this idea that life doesn't have any meaning, at least not any set preordained meaning. And because of that, we're all, each of us, sort of on our own. We're in a universe, in a world that doesn't provide us with any real direction, any meaning, any purpose. And we have to sort of carve it out for ourselves. Now, up to that point, I think this is a very positive philosophy, right? Your life is in your hands. I mean, it's actually very, if you think about it, it's a very inspiring idea that life is in your hands. You control your own existence. You make choices, and as a result of those choices, you may benefit, you may not benefit, but even if you don't benefit, you can then decide to go in a different direction, right? You can be anytime anyone says you can be anything you want to be in life, that's sort of touching upon this idea, right? That, you've been given this gift of life, and you can do with it what you want. And the possibilities are endless, right? You can do whatever it is you want. The possibilities are utterly endless, okay? So that's a real positive aspect to this. Although some existentialists, much like Camus, push it to the extreme of absurdism by saying, well, in the end, when it's all said and done, you're going to be dead and buried and be little more than food for worms, right? The lights are going to go out and that's it. That's the end of it all. So what does it really matter what you do, right? Because it's not going to have any lasting legacy, really, right? You'll be dead. That's it. You may have left behind a legacy based on, like if you made a lot of money and you donated it, say, to charitable causes, and, you may have children and they'll carry on, your memory and certainly your genetics. But in general, your life is over and that's it. And so there is really no ultimate meaning to life, which is, if you think of it that way, it has a very negative connotation and sounds very, very much absurd, right? That what's the point of life if we die anyway, and and nothing really matters in the end when it comes to our decisions. Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher, the 19th century German philosopher, is credited with the phrase, God is dead. God is dead. And what he really meant by that is not that God is dead per se, because he didn't believe in God. So it's, for to say that God is dead means that God was alive and then died. At least it sounds like that. But what Nietzsche really meant is that in a modern context, a post-Enlightenment academic milieu, at least, you can't really defend the existence of God. Maybe not. I mean, it depends on what school of philosophy you embrace, and it depends in large part on your own beliefs. But this idea that we are putting the meaning of our lives on ourselves rather than on God is a theme that runs throughout existentialism. It goes way back to thinkers like Dostoevsky and Kierkegaard and Nietzsche and Sartre and Camus. This idea that we are not that we're God, but that we are a person or people who decide for ourselves. Nietzsche writes about the Superman, right? And he doesn't mean the comic book Superman. He means the person who rises above the fray, the person who is able to make meaning for themselves based on their own decisions and actions, as opposed to, resting on the laurels of religion. Okay? This is a very, very, very basic introduction to some of the themes and some of the ideas behind existentialism, particularly modern and postmodern existentialism. I recommend, maybe this summer when you have some free time, that you read The Stranger by Camus. It's a very easy read. His writing style is very much akin to Ernest Hemingway. Mono and dual syllabic words fill the pages of this text. I also recommend that you read No Exit by Jean-Paul Sartre. It's a play that is, I think, both tragic and comic. It's a story about hell. And what you quickly find out is hell is not what you've been taught, right, by religion. It's not, or what you've seen in the works of people like Dante and Chaucer and Milton. The conclusion to No Exit is that hell is other people. That's another famous line within existentialist thought. Hell is other people. This play revolves around three principal characters by the name of Garson, Estelle, and Inez. And these are three people. They didn't know each other in life, no connection whatsoever. They all die, and they all end up in hell. And hell is a sort of a sitting room, or like a living room, right? And all three of them have to be with one another for all of eternity. And the play takes place in that room, the entire play. And it's a series of really conversations between these three characters where they end up this may not have been their intent, but they end up sort of tormenting one another by forcing the others to, but each pair of characters force the other to confront why they're in hell, right? Why are they here? What did they do? What was their life about? Now, you might say that sounds like a contradiction. If Sartre didn't believe in God, he believed in hell. Well, as I said, his conclusion is that hell is other people. He uses the setting of hell sort of metaphorically in this play to paint this picture, to unpack his philosophy of what a hellish existence is. So that's something else you might want to put on your reading list for the summer. I will post some of the notes that are part of this lecture on our Canvas page in the announcements tab. And I'll also post a discussion question. You do need to read this. I sent you a link to this essay, Existentialism is a Humanism. Okay? Read it. It gives great insight into the mind and the existentialist philosophy of Jean-Paul Sartre, and it'll benefit you as you sort of enter into dialogue with your classmates on this topic. So, again, this is a real brief summation of this philosophy. There's clearly more to it, and I encourage you to explore that. And I encourage you to continue to be safe, to keep distance from one another, and wash your hands. And I think that's it for now. Again, contact me if you need anything, and I will email you with further instructions. Take care.